Right, welcome to the last talk for today in this room. Talks by Julia Glynn. Julia started her career in investment banking and now wears a variety of data heads in many sectors. She was promoted to Vice President at Equities Technologies at Credit Suisse, and she's now the CEO and part owner of Extremis Technology. On top of that, she's a panel member and chapter contributor to the Alzheimer's Society and co-creation tech manual for the 2021 Longitude Prize. And she's going to talk about the healthy aging sector and the role of people-centered design in data-driven innovation.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So this is really kind of a tale of two halves. And unfortunately, my colleague who's doing the second half wasn't able to make it today. So he's early diagnostics and I'm healthy aging. But I'm going to talk a bit about some of the opportunity that open API and public data sets gives innovators and data scientists in terms of opportunity in the sector. And I will lead on to talk about some workshops that we have upcoming to which are free to join, where you can learn about healthy aging data sets and how to do some correlations and how perhaps to do some service design from public data sets in the healthy aging sector. So my job is a design innovation lead, and my real job is actually about, in terms of the technology that we invest in terms of the technology that helps people as they age, my job is to ensure that that is actually people-centered. We see so much coming into our competitions, asking for funding, applying for funding, that is really, really clever tech, really of the last minute, incredible kind of automated service support stuff that encourages autonomy, but it's not inclusive, it's not able to be used. So my job is about bringing the technology back to the person. So I'll talk a bit about the challenge. So the Healthy Aging Challenge basically invests in innovation, particularly service innovation, that addresses key 7 themes of aging. And we invest in things that keep people more physically active, solutions that help people age in the workplace, keep people more connected. So there's a massive digital inclusion movement going on at the moment, and that's something that we increasingly invest in. And socially connected. So those are the 7 themes that we invest in. And a fund that I manage is just closed, Designed for Aging, and it was incredibly well represented in terms of technical services to support independence and dignified aging and life in years rather than years in life. So in terms of our innovation pipeline, we invest at all ends of the scale. So if you are an academic or a PhD, we can invest in research that helps spin out actual commercial propositions. And then we invest all the way right up to the end in terms of market scaling in large companies. So we invest in bigger companies as well that can scale quickly. So we invest all the way across the whole kind of growth cycle, And all of this, and I'll talk a bit more about this because this is a free resource, is supported by our community of practice. So our community of practice gives you a real insight into the healthy aging sector, some of the current innovations, and some free resources in terms of trying to be very inclusive about innovation. Right, so as I said, my fund that I manage is just closed in terms of applications, and increasingly we see data-driven innovations enter our competitions, and it's data-driven innovations that inform the design of services. And so the idea is that these contributors, the increasing rafts of data sets and increasing publicly available data help to design services that real people use. And we have some challenges around that, because whilst now is the time in terms of proliferation of open API sources and our ability to map sources together and find out new meaning and address new challenge, it's incredibly difficult to make sure that service design stays person-centred, and that is a huge challenge. And not only person-centred, but actually that it's useful, relevant, and equitable. And I'll talk a bit more about that. So, in terms of data sets of interest, and we're going to be looking at some of these in our upcoming workshops. Obviously, NHSX, the open digital data sets, give huge insight into primary and secondary healthcare issues. And one opportunity in terms of community services data sets and commissioning data sets is that you can see gaps in the market in terms of service provision. So between adult social care and the NHS, there's a huge shortfall in terms of services in existence that can support people as they age. And that's the most exciting thing about these data sets, is that they provide an innovation landscape so that anyone, because most of these tools in terms of free software and stuff are just easily to download and kind of play with. So there's opportunity for new service innovation to fill in gaps in market failure in terms of one area that's very underrepresented is actually exercise classes and improving physical activity. Open Tableau, so Citizens Advice now publish all of its data on Tableau, and some very interesting applications of that data to bring about inclusive finance innovation, because most of the problems that Citizens Advice deal with are to do with money and debt and financial services and products. So I'm actually working on a product now which is looking at how to make financial services more inclusive, and I think it's an area of huge neglect and an area of huge need. So another interesting data set is the English longitudinal study of ageing, and that goes back all the way back to the 90s. So it's very, very good in terms of looking for correlative insights. And then Age UK, Office for National Statistics, the opportunity there for entrepreneurs is making sure that you understand regional and future demand. So with all of these open API and diverse data sets, there's huge opportunity, and that's what some of our workshops are going to be covering, and they're free, and I'd encourage you to join. So I'm going to go a little bit into the ELSA project, and what I'm really interested in is the emotions in the data, because we talk about data as a science, and we talk about data as a kind of extension of information technology. But the interesting thing about the public data sets is that very often the emotion, the actual people behind them, the emotion is misreported or misunderstood. And this is an area where data science still, in terms of machine learning, in terms of interpretative conclusions from data sets, is still an area that needs to improve. So the ELSA project is longitudinal, and the great thing about longitudinality is that it helps iron out outliers and fake news, because obviously it's spread over a broader time horizon. And the interesting thing, I think, about this English longitudinal study of ageing is that it's self-reported. So obviously, if you get to talk about something yourself and get to report something from your own position in that moment in time, it's going to be subjective, and there's going to be a motive bias. And so obviously being positive or feeling negative on that day means you're going to report something different or something with a particular nuance. So we've seen a lot of application and extensibility with the ELSA data set in terms of data-driven innovation, because now with NHSX, all of the kind of administration data in terms of healthcare administration data is online, so you can link the two to see correlation and causation or not. So this is something else that we see a lot in terms of informing the design of technical support services for people who want to remain in their home for longer, in terms of the understanding and the nuance behind the data. So the fund that has just closed, I'd say 75% of incoming innovation was to do with technical devices and technical services that help people be more independent for longer at home. And looking at some of these stats, we looked at the correlation between loneliness and what is termed cumulative hazard in terms of the likelihood of falling or having an accident in the home. And so we know that social isolation and loneliness are linked to increased likelihood of mental and physical deterioration. But what is much more difficult to determine is whether going into hospital is then more likely to make you socially isolated and lonely. So it's this chicken and egg situation in terms of we know that they are they're coexisting, these causes and trends, but it's much more difficult to tease out the truth and which has the bigger influence on the other. And so, interestingly, if you look at the self-reported gradient, at first it's steeper, which would suggest that people are perhaps pessimistic in terms of reporting hazards in the home. And then you can see, compared to hospital admissions, where there's a kind of gradual trajectory, where you've got self-reported, you've got these bumps. And those bumps are people fighting that desire to stay in their own home and not being motivated to let the community know or let social services, NHS know that they're experiencing problems. So another area of interest is heuristics in terms of these open data sets. So as I was saying, there's often emotional significance where an outcome can be masked and you don't necessarily see it. So with the Citizens Advice Open Tableau that we're using for an inclusive finance project, if you looked at the data in one way, all of the data would tell you that 40% of older people are contacting Citizens Advice about finance and debt, and that those are negative issues where you would assume that there was going to be a negative outcome. But actually digging deeper and looking at the data in another way and applying some other data sets and some other terms of significance, actually half of those interactions had positive outcomes because it was about finding, signposting people to more income that they were owed or helping people with their pension planning. So the problem with data, if you look at it without people, is that you can draw the wrong conclusions, or there is another conclusion behind the first one that you draw. So this is, again, something that's really interesting because, as I said, coming into our Healthy Aging Challenge, we have loads and loads of voice technology. And if you look at standards that govern technical services and accessibility, like the WCAG 2.1, there isn't actually any voice coverage. There's no standards that underpin how they should work and the quality of them. So something really interesting that's come into my challenge is an Alexa where the vectorization has been done for the other 20% of global languages. And also, obviously, Alexa is adapting to more people-centred phraseology. So even in the support aids and the innovations that come in terms of supporting older people, there's still a long way to go in terms of diversity and fair representation. So revisiting the challenge in terms of our investment objectives, amongst all of the amazing innovation that comes in from data-driven innovation, we have to make sure that what we get behind, what we back, is useful, equitable, and relevant. And so the challenge is that it has to be useful for as many people as possible and relevant for as many people as possible. And the problem is that there's still a lot of inequity in algorithms and in data sets. So how do we tackle this? So what we're doing on my fund is a design stage gate. We call it a people analytics. So where we have a tech service that delivers in-home support or medicine prompting reminders, or where it's a technical service which helps kind of geolocation in terms of people roaming from home, all sorts of different in-home technical support services. Now, what we do on my Design for Ageing fund is we deploy this design stage gate. So the design stage gate, after 6 months of the point of investment, we actually scrutinise user engagement in terms of who is actually using that service and is that user group diverse. And then we look at how organisations use people-centred design. So what people think, what real people think, is actually the most important asset in the innovation journey. So it's not the tech or the cleverness of the tech or the novelty of the tech, it's whether it's inclusive and whether what people say about it shows that it has utility. And then we look at how that technical service has been taken up and accepted within that practice community. And then we look at all of that data and all of that feedback, and we ask, well, could that service be taken up at large and at scale in the market so that it could help as many people as possible? So we've actually now decided that where organisations can't score above this acceptability threshold in terms of inclusiveness and using people-centred feedback as an asset, we stop funding after 6 months. So what we're doing really by doing this design stage gate is we're kind of forcing that union, that person-centeredness, to find that group of people behind the data. Because as we all know, that data tells a story, but that story often isn't the whole story. And even if you only have a short or small section of outliers, it might be those outliers that need the most intervention. So we work with the National Innovation Centre for Ageing to bring up community and member issues to really get the people's voice behind tech services. So we have representative groups from all across the UK and internationally who pick up these tech services, particularly around voice and around open API, data-driven innovation, to make sure that there's that people-centeredness. And this is the free resource I was talking about. So we've got healthy ageing and data-driven innovation workshops coming up in December and February, where we're going to look at some of these data sets and some of the innovation opportunities. So this is the bit that my colleague was going to present, and so I shall cover that as best I can. So this is in the Data to Early Diagnosis and Precision Medicine Challenge, and it's really interesting when we got together to work together, whilst I'm healthy ageing and he's data to early diagnosis. So many of our common shared problems are to do with technology being inequitable, data being inequitable, and people being too far removed from the problem that's trying to be solved. He is basically asking the same question: how do we ensure healthcare AI is representative and inclusive of the entire population? And I'm going to I'm going to play his voiceover because I probably won't do it credit. There is a embedded in here, there's a speaker thing, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get it to work.
To meet this opportunity, 2 work streams were established within the challenge, the first one of which second work stream within this...
Sorry, this is me messing it up, sorry. I'll go back to that point.
Second work stream within this area, the challenge, are the 7 integrated diagnostics projects. And you can see from the slide how the funding breaks down. These projects also involve radiology, pathology, AI, machine learning, but also some of them involve genome sequencing and the analysis of biomarkers. So I wanted to talk about the end-to-end process for algorithm development. So in step 1, the NHS partners, so the clinicians, assist in finding relevant data sets. Early in the programme and during the pandemic restrictions of 2020, there was a lot of retrospective data used. But as the ethics, approvals, data sharing agreements and secure platforms have been built, this has allowed prospective data to be gathered. In step 2, the data is de-identified or anonymised, and the pathologists or radiologists annotate thousands of images to indicate whether the tissue is normal or shows signs of abnormalities, i.e. signs of disease. And at this stage, a small percentage of the data set is held back or put to one side to be used at a later step in the process. In step 3, the algorithm developers can build their initial models and start to train them on the annotated images. And this step will be highly iterative as refinements are made to increase the accuracy of the model. Moving to step 4, The model is tested and validated, and this is where that held back data from the initial data set is used, so that the model is validated and its accuracy is validated on this unseen data. Step 5, so the algorithms can't be used in a clinical setting until regulatory approval has been granted. So I'm sure you've all seen the recent coverage on the review into medical devices that the Health Secretary launched a couple of weeks ago. The algorithms that I've been discussing are classed as medical devices from the regulator's point of view, in the same way that the oximeter shown here is. There's clearly a need for all groups within society to have the highest possible quality of treatment within the algorithms that we're developing. On top of this, it strengthens the algorithm itself to be of the highest accuracy possible and to minimize any bias. So the bias creeps into the algorithms based on the training data that's being used in their development. So the selection of a representative data set really is key to the minimizing of the bias. So how do we create algorithms with minimum bias? So the way that the projects were set up at the outset is that they have integral health economics work streams, and these work streams, as it says here, are responsible for looking at how NHS resources are currently allocated in relation to the diseases that are in question. And this analysis then helps to identify where it's best to put the trials to reach individuals who would most benefit from early diagnosis of those diseases. One of the integrated diagnostics projects, which is based out of the University of Manchester, is concerned with the early diagnosis of liver disease. Solis is the partner on the project that's responsible for the health analytics work. And they're delivering 4 key areas of insight. So firstly, the geospatial visualization, which is generation of heat maps to provide a topography of localities at risk of chronic liver disease. They also provide risk analysis and modelling, so development of novel risk models associated with the prediction of chronic liver disease. And this analysis will concern itself with the probability and risk of future events as these concern chronic liver disease. Where the data allows it, then these new risk models will consider the financial impact or risk associated with the risk in the population. Then it's important to think about multimobility, so we can describe the scope and the nature of multimobility across the Greater Manchester geography and provide insight as to the relationship between these comorbidities and chronic liver disease. Then finally, Solis can link together primary care and secondary data sets, and that supports evaluation of the interventions over time. So a population health management approach is required in order to measure the impact of the implemented interventions on the population. So in summary, there is significant investment happening to make the UK the best location to develop diagnostic AI. This benefits patients, the NHS, and supports economic growth. Ensuring that the products developed are as representative of the population as possible supports the successful realisation of all 3 of those outcomes. Thank you for listening. If you've got any questions, I'll be very happy to receive an email on my address below. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sorry that I kind of really made a meal of his slides, but I reckon it serves him right for not being here. So thank you very much, everyone.
Right, first of all, thank you for that interesting talk. Are there any questions?
Yeah, just a quick one. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, in terms of sort of like getting support. I think you mentioned earlier on it requires sort of like PhD or something to sort of like to get early access. But what about people without PhD but with other work experience?
We invest in, it's just that that particular Catalyst Award is for kind of like university and academic research that could be spun out commercially. But we invest in all sorts of innovation, in all sorts of innovators, and that's what our community of practice is. It brings them all together, so everybody can be an innovator and everyone can work together to solve some of the challenges that we have. So absolutely join that community of practice and yeah. Well, you don't need to. The best thing that's come into my competition is an innovation around giving carers more rights, and they are a carer. You know, it comes from everywhere, the innovation. So.
Anyone else?
In terms of the data, so I know one of the first points was NHS Digital, but that is usually outdated. Is there, so what's the alternative, or like, is there any open source data that you use, or is it all paid, or how does it work?
Well, because we combine a lot of digital sources, some of it is outdated, but the longitudinal nature of it offsets some of the outdatedness. But citizens' advice is month by month, for example. There's lots of other contributors that are month by month. And the challenge, I suppose, is gluing it together and drawing inference from that kind of chronological context. But yeah, I agree with you. But I suppose because we work with real users and real members, we see current problems, and we also see how technology fails to be inclusive in terms of great innovations, but no one wants to use them. So a great example of that is the Alexa, because so much self-care is delivered via Alexa, and Alexa only manages 80% of the representative community. So.
I guess a lot of the data is in the local authorities and in the care providers the private companies that they then get to actually do the work. Is that reflected in the NHS data, or is that data kind of not available?
I actually think, because I've worked in terms of service provision for local authorities, I think local authorities aren't good at sharing real data. I think the ethics surrounding the NHS publication of data means it is better in terms of what is shared, but there's still massive gaps in terms of understanding, which is why we're not yet there in terms of tech-supported stuff being people-centred properly. So in my opinion, there's not an awful lot of local authority data unless it's demographic. So not of that much interest.
Hi there. Thanks for the talk, by the way. I wanted to ask, how do you incentivize companies to actually care about being inclusive and diverse, not for just like, virtue signaling, but to actually want to do it? Because I know the NHS is, they're struggling in terms of finances. So say like black people, we're only 3% of the population. So what's the incentive for them to actually, help?
Yeah, I think that one is relatively easy to answer, because the way that we ask people to apply for funds now, they have to reflect that diversity in their user groups. They have to reflect that diversity along many stages of their journey. And now with the Design for Ageing Fund that I look after, if people don't reach those design criteria 6 months in, then we just stop the funding. So they're hugely incentivised to put together the evidence that we ask for, because the best way to make someone do something, obviously, is to take away the funding, and then they will do what you need them to do. So,
Okay, so no further questions, and let's thank the speaker again.
yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.